Saving historic sites in the Garden State. That's next on Perspective New Jersey. Hi, I'm Nora Muchanic and welcome to Perspective New Jersey. These days, historic preservation isn't about saving a few old monuments or stopping development. It's about managing change and finding new uses for older buildings rather than just knocking them down. Today we're going to find out more about what's going on with the effort to save historic places in New Jersey and at the same time planning smart growth. With me here to explain it all and talk about some of the 10 most endangered historic sites in New Jersey is Ron Emrich, the Executive Director of Preservation New Jersey. Welcome. Thanks for being here, Ron.
Thank you for asking me.
First of all, if you can, would you just describe to us generally what historic preservation is? What does it mean?
Well, these days it means, as we like to say, protecting some place from becoming any place. The character of communities, of towns, of our cities, of rural landscapes have a lot to do with how they were built and who was there early on and why, the stories that are associated with them. And our goal is to help folks manage the change that inevitably occurs in those communities or on those landscapes to try and help retain that kind of character that makes them unique and not just become just like any place else.
These days it's more than just saving the place where Washington slept.
Absolutely.
And there are many of them in Jersey.
And there are many of them in New Jersey, more than George Washington ever remembered.
Tell us about Preservation New Jersey. How did you get started? Was there a single event or a single site that was trying to be saved that started you guys, or how did it work?
It was really more of a movement to, in response to a lot of places, of historic places that were being lost. 1978, actually, our founders came together to a small group of architects and historians who were concerned about the loss of historic places across the state, and looked to other states where the same kinds of organizations were being founded all about the same time. And it was incorporated in 1980.
Are you of the state? Are you a state institution? Are you a private organization? How does it work?
We are not of the state government at all. One of the misconceptions, I think, which makes it challenging for us as a nonprofit organization to raise private funds, which is where our funding comes from. Our members, donors, corporate support, etc.
So let's talk about what's been happening to New Jersey over the last many decades. I guess in urban renewal, during urban renewal in the 60s, 70s, they were just knocking everything down. What was happening? What's been happening?
Urban renewal, as you say, in the 1960s and into the 70s was knocking down whole sections of mostly the larger cities in New Jersey. The riots, unfortunately, in the late 1960s caused the loss of a lot of historic places, whole neighborhoods, actually. And then New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the country. Our environmental partners point out that we're going to be built out very soon, and in order to build out, the development community has gone both outward into farmland and open space, but also inward into our towns and cities, and knocking down historic places to create the any places that often occur.
Now, would you say that back in those years in the 60s and 70s, except for a small group of people, that no one really cared that you were knocking these things down? It was considered the way to go, get rid of some of these eyesores?
I would never say that no one cared, but I think that the support for retaining community character, historic preservation, has been a slow, gradual growth among citizens who more and more recognize how important these places are. But I think that there were always people who were concerned. I mean, the modern historic preservation movement in the United States can be seen to stretch back at least until the 1920s, when the first cities adopted preservation ordinances. Certainly in our own region, the loss of the Pennsylvania Station in New York City in the 1960s, people were outraged at the loss of that extraordinary place. And so I think it's always been a goal for a lot of people, but it's growing.
And you mentioned the word character a couple of times. Talk to me about what it does to the character of a town or a city when all of these historic buildings or these older buildings are just victims of the wrecking ball.
People describe to us all the time that part of their own community's soul is lost when some of these places are lost. The town of Milltown in Middlesex County lost a very important house a couple of years ago that was on our 10 most endangered historic places list, the Forney House, which was built by and for the son of the founder of the town. It was an icon in the community, and that son had been a physician in this small town, and so his house was also the town hospital. Generations of babies were born there. People had remarkable connection to this place, and it has now, after a strong fight on the part of the local community to try and save it, it's been knocked down, and a drive-through bank is being built there directly across the street from another drive-through bank.
That's really got to hurt, because once these things are gone, they're not coming back.
Gone forever.
How do you decide exactly, or who decides what stays and what goes? What is a site worth saving?
Well, that's sort of a two-part question. Why is some place historic, or who decides how something is regarded as historic, can be defined in several different ways. There are sort of formal designations that occur, the National Register and the New Jersey Registers of Historic Places. Many municipalities in New Jersey, more than 100, designate properties or whole neighborhoods or districts as historic locally. But more often, people define what's historic by what's important to them. And that is very rarely a place where George Washington slept. Certainly that's a pretty easy way to define historic. But the house in Milltown was historic because everybody in town recognized that it was.
Knew of it, meant something to them.
It was some place important to
And
them.
that's frequently how these movements start, the movements to save something.
That's exactly right. It's very grassroots, it's very much from the ground up. We're a statewide organization with members all over the state, and we try to help people to save these places. But what's really key are the people who live there and who value those places as places of character in their own hearts.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to go over some of the most endangered sites in all of New Jersey. Please stay with us. We'll be back in a second. Hi, we're back, and we're talking with Ron Emrich, the Executive Director of Preservation New Jersey. And Ron, your organization's goal is to save some of these really important historic sites in New Jersey. And one of the sites that has gotten a lot of attention lately is an archaeological dig that's right next to the State House. It's called Petty's Run. Tell me about that.
Petty's Run officially was a creek that is now underground and channelized, but it was the site in the 18th century and into the 19th century of a succession of very important mills, steel and iron forge to begin with, which during the Revolutionary War was making steel for both British and American soldiers, bayonets and muskets, and it later became a cotton mill. The State House was built next to it later on, as a matter of fact, but the site was, of course, covered over many, many years ago, and has now, over the last 2 years, been uncovered by archaeologists as part of a larger project to create a larger state park around the State House.
And it's run into trouble, I understand. It's been exposed, it's been dug out, but now there's a movement to bury it all over. Tell me about that.
Well, for some reason, the state administration decided that it needed to be buried, and that all work should stop, that the archaeology should not continue, and that the park, at least for the time being, will not be built. And so the decision was made very abruptly, we think, and without a lot of thought, that the archaeological dig will be buried and covered over with grass. We're concerned because the plan for this site was to interpret it. It's an internationally significant place, actually. People who are interested in industrial history from all over the Western world have been following this story because it's the only one of its kind that's ever been uncovered.
And the state's arguing that it's a financial consideration. They don't have the money to develop it as a park and a tourist attraction right now?
That's right. That's what they maintain now. We know that the money was already earmarked for it using some constitutionally dedicated capital funds that already exist. But the state now says that they don't want to use the money that way, and so they want to cover it up. And that also that it's been pointed out or claimed that it's an eyesore as it is. We believe that a middle ground could be found. It's a tremendous loss to the city of Trenton and really the state of New Jersey as a potential tourist attraction. We need look no further than the President's House in Philadelphia, where thousands of tourists are fascinated by that archaeological site that's been very well interpreted, just recently opened.
Now there's another site in Millville, and it's called the Lavoie Theater, and I don't know, some of our audience may have seen recently that whole building collapsed right in the middle of downtown Millville during an extensive $8.5 million project. It's a 102-year-old theater, and the building collapsed. What's going on down there, and what's going to happen down there? How much of a loss is that?
Well, it's a tremendous loss. Millville is one of the towns that is designated in New Jersey as a Main Street town, in capital letters, which is a program that helps mostly smaller communities like Millville to revitalize their downtowns both physically and economically using historic preservation, using the great buildings that are already there to bring in new businesses, to bring in new tourists, to bring their residents back downtown to spend money and so forth. And this theater rehabilitation project was very much a centerpiece of the Millville Main Street program. So it's a loss to the streetscape. It was a beautiful facade, and not only has it fallen to the ground in a pile of bricks, but it ultimately took one building next door to it as well, that now is going to have to be demolished. So there's a big hole in the streetscape, which is a great loss from a historic preservation standpoint, but like everything else in our field, it's an economic loss as well.
When we talk about saving historic places, if there is a place in my town or someone else's town that they think is, is under the threat of the wrecking ball and needs to be saved, how do you go about saving it? Is that something your organization does, walk people through the process?
That's the main thing that we do, actually, is to help people walk through that process. And there are a lot of different steps, and it sort of depends upon what the property is, who owns it, what it could be used for, etc. If it's publicly owned, there's a whole set of goals that we try and help people work through, whether it's a school or a library or a municipal building or something. If it's privately owned, there's unfortunately less help currently in New Jersey than in many other states to help people preserve their historic houses, for instance, or a commercial building on Millville's Main Street that's privately owned. New Jersey, unlike virtually all the states around us, has no state financial help currently to help people. So we try and help people find ways to preserve their buildings using the tools that we do have available.
So you have a toolkit there. They can actually, it lays it out for them exactly what they need to do?
We do. More and more, like everybody else, we're using our website to help do education and outreach. And we have a whole set of tools that are available for download for free from our website that can help people walk through, how do I get my property listed on the National Register of Historic Places? How do I access the federal tax credits that are available for commercial properties? What do I do when the municipal government isn't listening, and what can we do to help get the city fathers to start paying attention to this?
Now, you mentioned incentives. The state of New Jersey is starting to come around. Something has happened recently.
Well, we're very excited. Preservation New Jersey has had on our top of our agenda for more than a decade, trying to get New Jersey to adopt a state historic preservation incentive, tax incentive, like 31 other states, including virtually every state around us from Virginia to Maine, that would help bridge the financial gap for both homeowners and commercial property owners.
So play it out for me. How would it work?
If your historic house, Nora, in central New Jersey is eligible for being on the National Register, you might be in a historic district, and you want to spend some money on, let's say, repairing your roof, repairing the front porch, repairing your historic windows, adding air conditioning and heating to the building, doing some work on the inside, you would be able to get a credit against your New Jersey income tax for 25% of what you've spent on your house renovation. And that tax credit against your income tax, your New Jersey income tax, could be applied in 1 year or over 5 years, or if you don't need that much credit against your income tax, you can sell that credit to your bank, and they can help you with your mortgage. So it would be the first time that New Jersey property owners would actually get some financial help.
Okay, great. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the most endangered sites in South Jersey. Stay with us. Hi, we're back, and we're talking with Ron Emrich, the Executive Director of Preservation New Jersey. And one of the things Preservation New Jersey is known for is the annual list of the 10 most endangered sites in New Jersey. And 2010, at least 2 of the sites were in the central South Jersey area, and one of them was Trenton Central High School. Talk to me about what the problem is there and why it's so endangered.
Trenton Central High is a huge building, and when it was built in the 1930s, it was the largest and most costly high school in the country. It's
Really?
a beautiful, architecturally beautiful building.
And we're looking at it right now. That's what it looks like and still looks like.
Structurally, still as sound as the day it was built, essentially. The architects describe it as like a bomb shelter.
Really?
But it has been allowed through just lack of maintenance and lack of political will, really.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second, because the picture that we're looking at right now is some of the mosaic, some of the tile work that was done, because Trenton was so famous for that.
It was. The city of Trenton was famous for potteries, and so the tile work at Trenton Central High was very representative of the beautiful tile work that was, the tiles that were made in Trenton. It's full of that kind of art. It's full of amazing architectural gems. But it's been allowed to deteriorate. It has a good deal of water penetration into it. It's a disgrace for the students to be forced to put up with that. But unfortunately, the state and the city have spent all of their time over the past number of years blaming each other for no money being spent on the building. And so it is endangered, certainly, every once in a while threatened to be torn down and replaced by another building, which would be astronomically expensive, would fill up a landfill.
And that's the gym right there we're looking at?
No, that's
the auditorium.
auditorium.
Auditorium,
That's
okay.
the auditorium. Beautiful, beautiful theater. It would be, from a green, sustainable standpoint, a crime to put all of that building material in the landfill, and more expensive to tear it down and build a new, really completely, suburban box kind of school. So,
so the fight there goes on.
The fight there goes on. There is a strong group of people in Trenton called A Better Plan that are calling for sort of a timeout and a re-examination of exactly what's there and why what's there is so important, and why preserving it will teach students a good life lesson about history, as well as preserving a great building.
There's another spot on the endangered list, the Bridgeton Free Public Library. Tell me about that and why that's in danger of being.
Well, this really, often we list buildings on our list because they are truly in danger of being lost. They also represent a larger issue, a broader issue, more statewide. Trenton Central High certainly is not the only historic school, public school in New Jersey that's in danger. The Bridgeton Library an early 19th century historic building with a 1960s large addition, has been challenged because Bridgeton, like many municipalities in the state, have very reduced budgets, and the money isn't available or isn't readily available for repairs and maintenance that need to occur, much less operations. So it's really listed both for this specific physical challenges that the building is facing, which are not insurmountable, but the money needs to be found.
And then there's the Beach Theater in Cape May, where they've been fighting about what to do with this building for years?
For years. This is a great example of mid-century architecture in Cape May. And Cape May, of course, isn't really known for mid-20th century architecture. It's known for its Victorian gingerbread. But the march of history goes on, as does the march of architecture. And this particular theater, built for the movies in the 1950s, with a row of storefronts across the front of it, was very cutting edge at the time, particularly on the Jersey Shore. It's a great building, and it was a great asset to the folks in Cape May, not only for the summer folks, but for the year-round residents who had a place to go to the movies, even in the wintertime. It's closed now. There's a developer who wants to knock down the theater part and build a parking garage and condos, not surprising on the shore. But there's a strong group of folks in Cape May who are trying very, very hard, working through the Municipal Historic Preservation Commission and so forth to try and save it.
And what's the idea? If you put it on this endangered list, it gets a lot of publicity, more people become aware of it, and you get a little more juice trying to save it?
That's exactly right. We've been publishing this list since 1995, and we have more successes than we have complete losses. The most sites, 150 or so now, after 15 years, are still endangered, sadly. They're sort of caught in the middle, but at least they're still standing. But bringing public interest, sometimes bringing new sources of money that people didn't really understand. We listed a few years ago the Trenton bathhouses in Trenton, designed by the very internationally famous Philadelphia architect Louis Kahn, which were very close to being torn down. And subsequently, after it was on the list for a couple of years, Mercer County purchased it and have just completed a beautiful restoration of this, again, mid-century landmark, and it's reopened.
And as we wrap up, just talk to me about the importance of this. You can't get this stuff back once it's gone.
Louis Kahn's bathhouses were his favorite building.
And not just the bathhouses, I mean in general, these historic
Right.
sites all over the state.
All over the state, whether it's Trenton Central High School or the great buildings on Main Street in Salem, or Millville or Vineland, the Security Trust building in Camden. All of them could have been lost and would have been replaced with who knows what, but something that wouldn't have their character, wouldn't help tell the story of Camden or tell the story of Salem, wouldn't have the same place in the hearts of the folks who've grown up there, who've worshipped in those historic churches, who shopped on the historic main streets. And so our goal really is to help people preserve the some place that is meaningful to them, so that they aren't finding themselves one day finding that they're just surrounded by any old place.
Well, Ron Emrich, thank you so much for talking with us and for the work that Preservation New Jersey is doing. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
And we will see you again next time on Perspective New Jersey. I'm Nora Muchanic. Take care.